Coming to you live from Chicago, the Windy City, while I'm at a wedding. Today we're learning about slope-intercept form of a linear equation again. This is day 2, so we're going to start to get a little bit more complicated today. Yesterday we learned the basics, moving on for today. Let's first review the 3 types of forms we talked about yesterday with slope-intercept form. First is most basic. Regular slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. The other form we talked about is next now form. The last form we talked about was function notation, and everything's the same except for the y, which gets replaced with f of x. So the only thing that's different here is the output, how we say it. We're inputting x into the function, we get out our output, which we write as f of x, the function of x. Let's do our first example for today. We're going to write the equation of a line given 2 points. Here are the steps for that, and they're right above, right here. First thing we do is calculate the slope, then find the y-intercept, then write the equation of a line. So we actually did this yesterday. I showed you the work for it. I probably did more work than I needed to because I was already given the point 0, 4 yesterday. So I could have just said that's the y-intercept, but we're doing the same type of thing today. So the first thing I want to do is find the slope. I'm going to make this point 1 and this point 2, and I'm going to use my slope formula. So y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. I'm going to go ahead and plug in my points. If I go ahead and solve that out, I would get 3 over 6, which is just 1/2. So my slope is going to be 1/2. Now we need to find the y-intercept. So we're going to do the same thing we did yesterday. We're going to write out our equation. So y equals mx plus b, and we're going to solve for our y-intercept. So I know my slope is 1/2. So I put that in for m, and then I choose a point to use for x and y. So I'm going to choose a second point because it's all positive. And go ahead and multiply that out. You get 4 equals 1 plus b, and so you know that the b has to be 3. So I have the 2 most crucial pieces of information that I need for all 3 forms here. It looks like I didn't give myself very much space. So we need to write our 3 forms now: normal, next now, and function notation. Starting with y equals, I know my slope is 1/2 and my y-intercept is 3, so it would be y equals 1/2 x plus 3. Next now, I have next equals now plus my slope, which was 1/2, starting at, my y-intercept was 3, so starting at 3. And the last one, f of x, would be the same as your y equals 1, except that the y is different. So f of x equals 1/2 x plus 3. Sorry, that's messy. I wrote a little too big, but those are your 3 forms. So now we're going to write in all 3 forms given a table. Again, the first thing we should do is find the slope, then find the y-intercept, then write the equation, or equations in our case. So let's first find the slope. I want to find the change in y and the change in x. Let's see, looks like my change in y is minus 3 every time, and that's when my x goes up by 1. So our slope would have to be m is equal to -3 over 1, which is just -3, so that's my slope, or my rate of change. And my y-intercept, if you look at the table right now, it's kind of got a bit of a problem in that you do not see an x equals 0. So what you want to do is add the 0 to the table, and you're going to have to solve for it. So this is x going up by 4. If x goes up by 4, then I would have to take this number and multiply it by 4 as well. So when x goes up by 4, the y would have to go down by 12, which means that the number previous to negative 18 to go with that 0 would have to be negative 6. So my y-intercept is this guy right here, 0, negative 6. I didn't see it in the table, so I had to figure it out. So just so we know, we're going to write out that b is negative 6, or 0, negative 6. We know m is negative 3. So let's go ahead and write our equations. Y equals negative 3x minus 6. That's normal, slope-intercept form. Next now would be the now plus my slope. So actually I'm going to do now minus 3. Same thing as adding negative 3. Starting at negative 6. And then f of x is the same thing as y equals. It's just got a different name for y. So negative 3x minus 6. Same kind of thing. Next example, we're going to write equations in slope-intercept form, next now, and function notation. This time it should be pretty simple. We're given a y-intercept and a slope. We are told that our y-intercept is negative 1, so that means that b is negative 1. And we're told our slope is negative 4, that's our m. Let's write this in the three forms. It's y equals mx plus b, so it'll be y equals negative 4x minus 1. Next now form is next equals now plus my slope. In this case it's negative, so now minus 4, starting at negative 1, because remember our y-intercept is also our starting point, and the f of x was the same thing as y equals, it's just got a different version for y.
What's the deal with
now all three forms from a graph. First thing we do, find the slope. If I want to find the slope from a graph, I have to have 2 points that touch the corner of a line, the corner of a square, so right here works. My change in y is 2, my change in x is 1. So that means that my slope would be 2 over 1, which is just 2. This is a puff positive line, so I leave my answer as a positive 2. Now my y-intercept is right here at negative 2. That's where the line crosses the y-axis. We have our 2 pieces of information. We know our slope is 2 and our y-intercept is negative 2, our starting point. Let's go ahead and write our three forms. Y equals would be y equals 2x minus 2. Next now would then have to be next equals now plus 2, starting at negative 2. And then the function notation, it's all the same except that we have a different name for y, so 2x minus 2. Example 4. This is where I see a lot of students struggle. I'm giving you 2 things in function notation. You need to find the equation of the line through those points. Remember, function notation is just a fancy way of telling you your x and your y. For this first one, f of negative 2 equals negative 3, what we're saying is that when I input a negative 2, I get out a negative 3. That's the same thing as having the point. I'm inputting a negative 2 and I get out a negative 3. It's the same thing as having this point, x, y. So same thing for the next function notation. I input a negative 6, I get out a 1. So that's the point, negative 6, comma 1. If you have 2 points, then you can always find the slope. Let's go ahead and do that real quick. So I went ahead and numbered my points. I wrote down the slope formula. Well, I plugged in the points. Found the change in y over the change in x. Simplified it. I got the slope was negative 1. Now we need to solve for the y-intercept. Write down your equation, y equals mx plus b. I check my 2 points. Neither of them have zeros for x's right now. So I need to go ahead and solve for b. I know my slope is -1, so I put that for m. I don't know what b is. And then I'm going to plug in a point for x and y. I'm going to choose the point -6, 1. -6 goes in for x, and 1 goes in for y. Let's multiply that and then solve. So 1 equals 6 plus b. Good thing I picked numbers that look so much like my variable. And I would get b is equal to 5. So we have our 2 super important pieces of information. Now you can write in all 3 forms. Do that on your own. If you've done it correctly, this is what you should get. Last problem is actually easier than you might think. Let's go ahead and read it. We're going to write an equation from this word problem. 4 years after a hedge maple tree was planted, its height was 9 feet. 8 years after it was planted, the hedge maple tree's height was 12 feet. What is the growth rate of the hedge maple? Growth rate. Remember, rate is slope. Rate of change. What was its height when it was planted? So the first thing we want to do is look for pairs of numbers, because if I have 2 pairs of numbers, then what I have is actually 2 points. So I'm going to do the first pair of numbers in red. I've got 4 years. After 4 years, I got 9 feet. Second pair of numbers, I'm going to do it in blue. 8 years gives me 12 feet. We're going to take those 2 pairs of numbers and write 2 points. So the first point would be, if I input 4 years, then I'm going to get out 9 feet. Input, output. The next point, if I input 8 years, I get out 12 feet. What we're trying to do is find the growth rate, or the slope. And so to find the rate, we find the change in y over the change in x, change in my dependent variable over the change in my independent variable. So let's go ahead and write our slope formula. Anytime we're solving problems like this, it's always going to save you some trouble in the long run if you write down the formula so you don't make small mistakes. Now I'm going to choose my points. I'm going to make this one 0.1, this 0.2, and go ahead and plug into your formula. I end up getting 3 over 4. So my change in y over change in x is 3 over 4. Since this is a word problem, it's probably going to be helpful to actually write what that means. The y's were my feet. So this is 3 feet. The x's were my years. So it's 3 feet in 4 years. But we are not done. So that's the first answer. And we should probably write that in a sentence. 3 feet in 4 years, or 3 feet every 4 years. Let's read the actual next question. It says, what was the height when it was planted? So when it was planted, that would be at 0 years. So we are actually trying to find the place where it started. If we want to find the starting point, then we're finding the y-intercept. So we're going to, same thing as we've done before, write out our equation and then solve for our y-intercept. I know my slope is 3/4, so let's put that in for m. And I'm going to choose a point for x and y. I'm going to choose 4 and 9. We're solving for b. Now go ahead and multiply. Remember, fractions multiply straight across. So I can make that 4 over 1 and then multiply the top and the bottom. I end up getting b is equal to 6. We're not done. We actually have to write our final answer in words. It's a word problem. And so that means, so b is your y-intercept, right? So this has to be y. My y was feet, and that's what the question is asking for. It's saying what was its height when it was planted. So talk about height here. Its height was 6 feet when it was planted.